Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! Anyway, all this started a couple months ago with an incident between my parents. It's important to note I still live with them, but have been working and providing for myself since graduating in the summer, and I'm fully self-sufficient. My father has always been an abusive person, albeit one that did support his family at the time, but due to his lack of self-control and outbreaks, the situation was more often tense than not, especially between me and him as the power began to shift and I stopped relying on him. So yeah, a couple months ago, in an incident between him and my mother, he hit her, which started my mother's silent treatment of him for about 2 weeks. When he decided to get physical again, this time against me, which resulted in a bigger fight, and in the process, my younger sister's shoulder getting hurt, mother breaking her nose, and me calling the cops. He was arrested that day and had a restraining order filed against him for 10 days. All temporary, as the police over here in Switzerland tends to avoid stepping in more than necessary, and did this for our protection while leaving us to make further decisions. An important thing to note is that my mother has always been a stay-at-home mom, especially since my sister is still underage, as she doesn't have a formal education to make much money in this country. So for her, divorce was more something like a last resort, and she attempted to try and get family counseling/couples therapy set up, which did not turn out so well, at which point we got her a lawyer and began the proceedings. I also studied law myself to an extent before going into my current field, so a lot of what happened here I was well equipped for, which did make things easier. This is where the money part starts. Our family has been pretty well off ever since I can remember. So my sister and I both have had somewhere in the ballpark of 100k each saved up for our schooling, first cars and so on. Half of this money was put into accounts in our name. While our parents could still access them, the money was legally ours. The other half was put into accounts in our grandparents' names in the US for logistical reasons. The day of the first court hearings, I was in the process of transferring said account fully into my name. As I was expecting something like what did end up happening to happen, later when the transfer succeeded, I found out almost all the money up to a fairly round number was transferred to my father's locked pension plan. This was a surprise to me. As to my knowledge, until then, only my mother was supposed to have direct access to it, while my father would have had to have the bank card, which I knew was with us. So after some checking, I found out my mother wasn't fully aware of when she had signed forms that gave him access, but more on that later. As I was now down on a big chunk of money, part of it was my literal income I have been saving, it was time to get my own lawyer. In addition to this transfer, back when we were building our house, my father took a loan from my account, which was understood to be a mutual agreement and him paying me back at a given time. Knowing a little about how his lawyer operated, the amount of offenses he potentially had to his name, and the fact that my mother and sister were now open to pressing charges against him if it came to it, I had a feeling that this would end up in an out-of-court agreement. I set up a meeting with my lawyer and collected as much evidence as possible regarding the transactions and ownership of that account. While my father did have the legal papers to manage my account, in Switzerland, that means any action is meant to be taken in my best interest. His pension plan doesn't concern me, so any reasonable judge would rule in my favor. Additionally, my mother's lawyer became aware of the situation as she legally represented my sister as well, who lost a similar amount of money due to the same thing. Before I even met my lawyer, he and my mother's lawyer discussed the situation and managed to create a good picture of it. So finally, the first meeting, I discussed the situation with my lawyer. As my father assaulted me, I had the options to press charges, as well as request for damages made and possibly sue him for the money. But to this day, it's hard for me to say if I would have managed to get all of it back with that method, as courts would have trouble recognizing his debt to me from the house loan, and not to mention the insane costs involved with starting a legal case against someone in your own family. Knowing my father, I also knew that he wouldn't shy from spending thousands of dollars to protect himself in court with better lawyers, which was exactly why my lawyer figured it would be better to come to a settlement, as I certainly had more I could use against my father than vice versa, with the only difference being that this way, I might get a lot more out of it than the money he only just took recently. At this point, I'd like to note that my grandparents had officially cut myself, my mother, and my sister out because they didn't agree with the decision for us to stay away from my father. They insisted on the need for family therapy, whereas we had already decided there was no point, and my mother was divorcing him, while I decided to get a lawyer and fight for myself. My father also managed to allegate that I had hit him on the day of the incident, which was another reason for me to make sure that no one could claim I accepted that statement for the obvious lie it was. Since my grandparents cut me out, I could say goodbye to that half of the money already. No way to sue for it. Nor was I legally entitled to it, so the bank couldn't do much. But this is where it gets interesting though. My lawyer created a whole list of things we could use against my father, ranging from the recent incident to cases from the past that I had written up when this all started, as well as using statements from my old teachers and my therapist to create the skeleton for a case that would certainly get expensive. The whole point of this was to have a solid foundation on which we could then approach my father's attorney and suggest a settlement for the money taken out of my account recently, as well as him returning the loan for the house. He was hesitant at first and even suggested to my mother that she and him together would pay off a small part of it over time as a compromise. But that clearly wasn't an option for me. After hearing this, I contacted my lawyer once again and had him double down on our very specific demands, that we wanted to come to an agreement for $50,000. In exchange, I would drop the charges and leave him alone. This also meant in return he would have to let go of the claims that I hit him, essentially closing the case for both parties. There was also a deadline for me to continue with the case, leaving him 3 more days to consider it. Luckily, the whole thing seemed to be a game of chicken, with him waiting until the night before the deadline to finally agree to our request. His lawyer contacted us and eventually wrote an email saying that they agreed with the requests and would be glad to sign a contract on the matter, making it up to my lawyer now to write up the contract and ended the whole deal. A funny part about this whole exchange was my father's statements that were part of the email to us, claiming that they had just as much of a case against me and could press charges if they so pleased, listing a bunch of things I had allegedly done that would warrant a countersuit. In the end, seeing that they agreed to pay me all that money, I'm quite sure those statements were just to show that they weren't afraid more than anything else, really. Since if they truly believed the allegations, they would have just proceeded with the case. Now, a couple days later, I received a transaction for all the money that we agreed on, and the case is officially over for me. The irony of it all is my grandparents cut me out and probably encouraged my father to do what he did regarding the last money I had left to my name. In the end, all the money that was in the US was the money my father used to pay me back, since the pension plan he paid the money into was locked, and he had no other quick financial means to reach the settlement. So, some money went down the drain on the lawyer, and most of the money saved for me ended up with me. The part that landed in the pension plan even came with its own benefits. As my parents are still married, my mother gets 50% of it in a divorce. All of this did come at a cost though, which is why the first thing I said in this post is the most important to me. My mental health has suffered a lot from all of this, and I've never been so burnt out. Not only that, I need more psychiatric attention than ever, and my relationship with my father's side of the family is forever ruined. So while that last part was necessary, they were toxic manipulative and abusive, and picking his side after all the incidents they knew about, and also knowing that there were more they didn't know about. The mental toll these things take on a person can affect your entire life, which is why I once again want to stress that if anyone out there is going through anything remotely similar, to please reach out to people you can trust, contact the authorities or something like that. You don't need to be stuck in that situation for as long as I was, which is a whole another story. My neighbors have 9 cars total parked in the street. They always park 2 of those cars in front of my house and won't move them the whole week. We have a regulation where we live that you can't leave your car parked for more than 48 hours in the same spot. My neighbors have a pretty big driveway where they can fit 4 cars, but it's always empty. They have told me that they don't like to leave their driveway with cars because it looks tacky. Over half the cars they have they don't even use. They just use them to save parking spots for themselves. In 2021, I noticed they were building a second unit. I'm at the back of their main house, and I noticed that they completed the house in under a month. This raised some red flags because it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 months with city inspections, taking the majority of time. I submitted the ticket with my city through the app and advised them that there might be some illegal residential building without permits. I didn't think much of it until a year later. I noticed my neighbors tearing down their second unit last week. Word got around our block that a city inspector was there making sure everything was being torn down. Based on what the materials and labor they put into their second unit, I cost them over $100,000. Many moons ago, I did automotive locksmith work. It was usually for cars that were impounded, repossessed, or people lost their keys. I'd make my rounds once or twice a week to the storage lots, and there would be a list waiting for me. One bank lot had a maroon Ford Tempo. I picked the ignition, took the lock out and put a new lock in. Then I made keys for the doors and trunk. I finished up the rest of the lot and left. Back at the office, we send the bank our bill and get on with our day. About 2 weeks later, a bank rep, Ed, calls and asks if I could take care of the customer for the locks missing. I asked why, and he said the guy was claiming damages and refused to pay. Note: the bank gets to charge the owner all of the costs for repossession, including locks and keys. I asked Ed what damages. Usually people get confused because we changed the ignition locks and their original keys don't work. But we gave them 2 new keys with the new lock. Their door and trunk keys still worked. It said, "The guy said you broke his rear window defroster." I was laughing. I said, "Ed, you know that making keys has nothing to do with his rear defroster, right?" His defogger was broke before the bank took the car and he was using it to get out of paying for the keys. Ed agreed but said his boss was tired of hearing the jerk scream. Yes, he said that. I told Ed not to worry about the $75. They gave us lots of work, please keep sending it. Ed was happy, his boss was happy, but I was not. I hate when people lie to get over on you. But what could I do? Ed sent the guy to my office and I gave him a check for $75. I also told the smug jerk I knew he was lying, that there was no way that making keys for his car damaged his rear defogger. His answer? Well, the bank doesn't know that. If I hated him before, now I hated him more. But again, what could I do? I forgot about it for about 6 months. Then went to pick up takeout at our usual Friday night place. Call it A's. Then I saw it. 3 doors down. The Lion Lock guy was opening a new restaurant. He had big signs/billboards in the shopping center complete with his name and photos on the signs. Now I knew what I could do. I went to his restaurant about a week after it opened. My ex wanted to try it out. I was hoping to run into the jerk, but he stayed in the kitchen the whole time. Probably for the best. I more than likely would have done something I'd regret. Well, the food wasn't bad, but it was nowhere near as good as the other place in the shopping center. A's, the one we got Friday night takeout from. So I made it a point to tell everyone heading into his restaurant that A's was much better. Every Friday night, I tell anyone heading into this liar's restaurant if they wanted good food, go to A's. I used to go into A's and sit at the bar and have a beer and place a takeout order. Now I walked into A's, ordered, and waited outside near the liar's restaurant. But it wasn't just Friday nights I did this. There was an Office Max in the same center. When I would go there, I'd walk over near this guy's restaurant and tell as many people near there as I could. Then my kids started taking karate in the same center. Yep, I did my anti-word of mouth advertising. I think this guy's restaurant lasted 2, maybe 3 years. I made it a point to talk with them every chance I could. I know they lost way more than $75. But in the end, I know I was petty, but I got my revenge. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.